In Okinawa, the elderly volunteer for the front line in a show of pacifist resistance against US military installations on their island home. Okinawa is a 3-hour flight from Tokyo, a subtropical paradise in the East China Sea. It makes up less than 1% of Japan's landmass, but it houses more than 50% of the roughly 50,000 US troops stationed in the country. And these latest protests have sprung up over the relocation of the Futenma airbase to an area near Camp Schwab. The airbase is in a densely populated area, but the decision to move it to the island's east coast, to Henoko Bay, has been a source of contention for environmentalists and anti-US activists. They say the frequent military exercises disrupt island life and are a constant reminder of a US occupation. The Japanese government says there is no alternative.
辺野古移設が唯一の解決策である。このことについては変わりありませんし、長年日米間で真摯に議論してきた上の合意であり。
Tokyo was on the itinerary of US Defense Secretary James Mattis's first overseas trip.
The alliance between the United States and Japan is enduring and will remain as the cornerstone of peace and security in the Asia-Pacific region.
And Okinawa is at the heart of that relationship. The military installations on the island are the US front line in East Asia, close to the Korean Peninsula and the East and South China Seas. The US has tried to reassure residents. Last year, the Americans handed a large tract of what was once military land back to the Japanese. And they say they'll relocate some of the troops to Guam. But Okinawans say they are unfairly carrying the burden for the nation and paying a high price. Last year, there were protests after a 20-year-old, Rina Shimabukuro, was raped and murdered by a former US Marine turned contractor. Okinawa's governor, Takeshi Onaga, has called for the removal of all troops and has support from large sections of the community. But is there any resolution which would put local concerns ahead of strategic interests? Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Sydney is Miyume Tanji. She's an expert on US-Japan relations with the Australian National University and is also the author of Myth, Protest and Struggle in Okinawa. And from the US state of Alabama, Walter Given. He's a retired Major General of the US Air Force and a Senior Vice Chancellor at Troy University. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Let me start with you. Walter Given, there are many on the islands and those from the outside who see the US troop presence there as a sort of relic of a post-World War II era that is irrelevant these days. How would you respond to that?
Well, I don't think it's irrelevant. I think this is one of the most enduring alliances that we've had in our history, and it's a strategic alliance that really responds to the security needs of Japan and of other of our allies in the Pacific. Bases are tremendously important to that alliance. This is a very strategic location for us. But of course, this is a two-way street. We work with Japan, and Japan's government has decided that this is where the base should be. And we're working with them to make that a reality.
Miyume Tanji, the Japanese government says there is no alternative. Are they wrong?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. They are wrong. The Japanese government probably has taken a lot of effort to make it sound like it is the only alternative. Through a lot of storytelling and manipulation of images, but it could be built anywhere in mainland Japan. That's the biggest reason the Okinawan people are protesting. One of the biggest reasons. It's because it is made to believe that it is the only alternative where it's not. And I mean, there are other places which makes more sense strategically as well. The argument that the Okinawa is strategically the best place is not quite right.
Right. And I want to address that.
It will make the most vulnerable.
Allow me to jump in just for a second. I want to address that right at the very end in terms of strategic location and some of the threats in the region. Let me go back to Walter Given now for a moment and ask about the symbolism of the protests. As an American, when you see thousands of Japanese, thousands of locals on the island protesting, saying we don't want the United States here, particularly the symbolism after last year, after a 20-year-old woman was raped and murdered by a contractor, but who was a former Marine. How damaging is all of that, in your eyes, to the image of the United States? And does it not give you the idea that at some point in time the United States is going to have to leave because the Japanese government is going to start to listen to the people of Okinawa?
Well, I've been a base commander. I've also been part of presences overseas. We always try to be as sensitive as we can to the local population. It's terrible when something like that happens, and I can guarantee you that the commanders have taken strong action to try to remedy that. We also abide by what we call a status of forces agreement with the host country, which clearly delineates all of our responsibilities. And beyond that, we constantly work to try to mitigate some of the things like noise, for example, that goes with aircraft operations. Because we are sensitive to what the local population is thinking and feeling. And so I see the protests, and I welcome their ability and their freedom to do that. I'm sure that we are working as closely as we can with the authorities in Japan and in Okinawa to address the issues. But we get, again, let me go back to this. It's not just about being someplace, it's about what you get by being there. And we've talked about some of the security challenges in this area, but one of the great things that you get by the training that was alluded to earlier is the ability to work side by side with our allies in the very place that we may have to work together. And of course, our Japanese allies also come to the United States and train at our bases. For example, I was the commander of Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada, and we hosted our Japanese allies there for exercises that they would have had a more difficult time doing in Japan.
And Major, looking at President Donald Trump, he's still getting his feet under the table, but just a second, ma'am, just a second. I just want to ask Walter Given, looking at President Trump, less than a month in office, along with General Mattis, how do you foresee them approaching the Japanese? Is it going to be too different to Barack Obama's approach?
Well, I can speak to General Mattis. I've served with General Mattis. I have the greatest respect and admiration for General Mattis. He's got a very good strategic sense for this region. And everything that I have heard General Mattis say and do so far is right in line with enduring interests, not just for the United States, but enduring interest of Japan and our allies in this region.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Miyome Tanji, final word to you. The United States says, hey, we've got an unpredictable situation with China, the tensions in the South China Sea, North Korea is unpredictable, and it is nuclear. The issues over Taiwan. We need to have some sort of military presence in the region. Do you accept that? Do you accept that the United States needs to be there?
The Okinawan people do not want to accept the presence there. They want it to be somewhere in mainland Japan, and I think that's fair.
Okay. Dr. Miyome Tanji and Major General Walter D. Given, it's been a pleasure having both of you on the program. I'm so sorry we have run out of time. Good to have you.